Welcome to the 10th DEM I Wonder Webinar. DEM has so many services, offerings, programs, and hidden gems that we want to share with all of you. So we're excited to take just a few minutes each week to highlight these features in our weekly webinar. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many exercises have been postponed or canceled. The Utah Division of Emergency Management is hosting this weekly webinar series aimed at providing local emergency managers with relevant content and opportunities to enhance their capabilities. Webinars will be live for Q&A and will be recorded for later viewing on the DEM website and YouTube channel. Most of these webinars will be seminars or workshops with a hands-on portion which will allow emergency managers to become oriented to a DEM process or test a DEM product. Our schedule today will be as follows. We'll start with our ground rules and etiquette. Next, we'll have a brief presentation by Angela Lang on THIRA. Following the presentation, there will be a hands-on portion where participants will be encouraged to test out the product or process that was presented. Following the hands-on portion of our program, the presenter will be available for a Q&A session. Following the Q&A, we will close with a short message about upcoming webinars. The ground rules today are fairly simple. Please mute your line while the presenter is presenting. If you have a question, you may type it in the group chat or unmute at the appropriate time to ask your question. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website for future viewing. Thank you all for your attendance today. And with that, we'll turn the time over to Angela Ling.
Hi, everyone. As Tracy said, I'm Angela Lang. I think looking through the call, I think everybody knows who I am by now, but the planning section manager at DEM. And so this is my second go at presenting for the I Wonder. Sorry, that was a doorbell. It never fails, something happens. Gotta love virtual meetings. But today, so last time I talked about continuity of operations planning, but today we're going to talk about THIRA and SPR, which is threats and hazards identification and risk assessment, and the Stakeholder Preparedness Report. So the purpose of THIRA and SPR. Basically, you want to identify the most challenging threats and hazards. It also, the THIRA and SPR determines the capability needed to address those threats and hazards and assesses current POETI capabilities. And POETI is your planning, organization, equipment, training, and exercise. The THIRA and SPR also identifies and addresses POETI capability gaps. So one way to look at it is that you can use the THIRA and SPR to answer the following questions. What do you need to prepare for? What level of capability do you need to be prepared? What are your current capabilities? And then what gaps exist between the capabilities we need and the capabilities we have? And how can we address those capability gaps? I think a lot of us have probably heard about THIRA and SPR, but maybe scratching our heads a little bit about why we would want to do one and what some of the benefits are. So for me, these were what I came up with. And hopefully as you do one, if you don't have one already, you can come up with some more. But some of the benefits include prioritized funding and identifying funding gaps. You can do this by using quantitative data to determine funding needs and potentially use it as a tool to petition for more funding to your legislative body or grant administrators. This was at the top of my list because we'll talk a little bit more about how you can do this later in this presentation, but it's a great tool to be able to say, here's our data, hard data, and this is why we need more money for our emergency management program. It can also, another benefit is to determine the training and exercise needs based on quantitative data and detailed gap analysis. So you can actually use your identified threats and hazards in THIRA for exercise scenarios. So you don't need to develop multiple scenarios. You still can, but that's one way to use it. And then prioritize training based on the largest gaps that you identify in your THIRA and SPR. And then finally, identify strengths and weaknesses in planning, organization, equipment, training, and exercise. Again, POETI. And then those strategically address, build, and sustain in these areas to gain more resiliency. So the foundation of THIRA. According to the National Preparedness Goal, a secure and resilient nation with the capabilities required across the whole community to prevent, protect against, mitigate, respond to, and recover from the threats and hazards that pose the greatest risk. THIRA and SPR directly supports this goal. And it does that by identifying the threats and hazards that most challenge the greatest number of core capabilities across one or more mission areas. So I have a picture up here of the 5 mission areas and the 32 core capabilities. Mission areas, for those who aren't familiar, are categories used to organize core capabilities and national preparedness activities. Core capabilities are the 32 distinct activities needed to address the greatest risks in the nation. The 3 cross-cutting capabilities, if you can see up at the top of that picture on the slide, you see planning, public information and warning, and then operational coordination. So those 3 are considered cross-cutting capabilities that span across all 5 mission areas. Thank you, Tracy. So THIRA Step 1, I should clarify, there's 3 steps to THIRA and 3 steps to SPR, and then you have your complete report. So THIRA Step 1 is identifying threats and hazards. You want to identify the threats and hazards of the greatest concern. This is based on impacts and likelihood. Likelihood is really important to consider because communities must allocate limited resources strategically, right? So a particular threat or hazard might be possible, but communities should determine whether the likelihood of its occurrence is large enough to drive investment decisions. So maybe just because you have a catastrophic event that has maybe a 5% chance of happening, that might not be as worthwhile looking at as something that is less catastrophic, but potentially, 60% more likely to happen. You also use threats and hazards that could pose the greatest challenge to at least one core capability. So there's those 32 core capabilities, and you want to look at something that poses a really challenges at least one core capability. Ideally, it'll be more, but if it doesn't challenge any of the core capabilities, it's probably not that big of a threat or hazard. And then you can identify the threats and hazards by using real-world events and historic incidents, subject matter experts. If you have a hazard mitigation plan, you may have already identified your threats and hazards. You can also use models and tools and exercises. So THIRA Step 2 is to add context and impact. So you want to, now that you've described or identified the threats and hazards, you want to describe what those are. So you do this by creating a scenario for the threats and hazards, explaining how they may affect the community and challenge the core capabilities. During this step, you want to be as specific as possible and include key elements that could change the impact. For example, you'd want to maybe include the time of year, time of day, number of people impacted, exact location, weather considerations, social and physical vulnerabilities, and other things. At the state level, probably not a surprise to anyone, we often refer to the earthquake scenario. So our scenario is pretty specific. It's a 7.0 magnitude or greater earthquake, hits the Wasatch Front, and I believe the scenario is 2 p.m. on a Friday in December. And the reason why we do that is because the time of day affects how challenging that threat is to the state's response, meaning that we have kids that are in school and we have parents who are in work. And so that challenges us in one way. Also, winter, it's harder to shelter people because you can't have people sheltering, in tents necessarily, because likely there's going to be snow on the ground. It also means that in addition to debris removal, you have snow removal to contend with. So all of those things you want to make sure that you incorporate into your scenario, and really think about what challenges you the most. You also want to identify impacts. FEMA provides a whole list of impacts that you would want to put actual numbers to. And here are just a couple examples. They have a lot more than this, but I thought this was a good sampling. So the number of people requiring evacuation, the number of people with access and functional needs, and the number of health facilities affected. They have other ones like number of fatalities and injuries and so on, but that's just to give you an idea. So THIRA Step 3, that's setting your capability targets. So to set capability targets, which capture the level of capability that can realistically be built, you use a FEMA-developed standardized target language and make them community specific. So an example of this is within 48 hours of an incident, provide emergency sheltering to 20,000 people and maintain that for 14 days. This would be what you would strive for. It may not be what you can currently do, but if you had it your way, this is what you would want to do, and this is what you think would need to happen to effectively respond to that threat or hazard. And highlighted in blue, capability targets have a time frame metric. So you see within 48 hours, that's something that you select. And then a critical task, which is provide emergency sheltering for a number, which is 20,000 people. The 20,000 is what you provide, just as an example. And then maintain it for 14 days. So that would be your impact. FEMA supplies all of the lettering in black, and then you would fill in with your best guess those metrics to develop your capability target. And then you want to identify the threat or hazard that most stresses each target. So if you identified 5 threats and hazards during THIRA Step 1, then you would pick which one actually impacts that capability target the most. So now we've just walked through THIRA Step 1, 2, and 3, and now we'll go to SPR Step 1. For those that joined, SPR is Stakeholder Preparedness Report. And Step 1 is assessing capabilities. So to do this, you identify and describe how capabilities have changed over the past year. You break it down by lost, sustained, and built. And then you rate the confidence and accuracy of the data and identify the sources used to inform the capability assessment. So going back, when you're looking at how capabilities have changed, it's basically a mathematical formula to come up with your estimated capability and how much you've sustained all the way to your estimated current capability. So to get your capability sustained, you would take your beginning capability, which is the capability at the beginning of the year that you're assessing. For example, for 2021, we would go back to January 2021, and that, or basically what we turned in for 2020, and that becomes our beginning capability. And then you would subtract your capability lost, and then you would get your capability sustained. So after you have your capability sustained, you would add whatever capability you built, and that gives you your current capability. And then again, your current capability will become the following year's beginning capability, if that makes sense. I'm not really a math guru. So many people can attest to that, but it's actually a little bit more. I think that FEMA overcomplicates it, but it does end up being a little bit easier than it looks here. So SPR Step 2 is to identify capability gaps and address gaps. So determine capability gaps and identify relevant POETI areas. Again, for those who joined a little bit later, that's planning, organization, equipment, training, and exercise. And then you want to assign a priority rating. A couple of notes about priority rating. Not everything can be a high priority. It seems to be the default that we just naturally assign everything as a high priority. But if you're doing this for 32 core capabilities and you list them all at high, then there's no way of actually prioritizing anything if they're all at the same prioritization level. So you do want to make sure that you're giving some actual thought to whether it's high, medium, or low. And then you take a combination of a low confidence rating. You have the opportunity to say on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you with the information you've put in so far? 5 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. And then you combine that with something that has been designated as a high priority, and that actually merits a higher focus in an emergency management program. So again, you're taking a low confidence rating, such as a 1, maybe even a 2, and then combining that with a high priority. And then when you look at your THIRA and SPR, that's how you can determine how you should focus your emergency management program. It gives you a clearer idea. And that also goes back to one of the benefits of having a THIRA and SPR is to help you with prioritization. Also in step 2, you determine the gaps in each POETI area as necessary, and you describe how those gaps will be addressed in each POETI area and the time frame for implementation. And that's nothing that, whether you are sharing it with the state or, with FEMA, it's nothing that actually you get penalized for if you didn't address it that way. It's really for you to get you thinking about how you're going to do this and set some goals for your program. You also identify gaps in functional areas for all capability targets, and functional areas are a subset of core capabilities. I'll leave it there because I don't want to spend too much time on that one. So SPR Step 3, this is describing impact of grants. So in the beginning, when I was talking about the benefits, and one of them was that you can use the THIRA and SPR to plead your case for more money with potentially with a legislative body or grant administrator. So this is a part of the THIRA and SPR that you would gather that data to present to them. So you want to estimate the degree to which various funding sources impacted building and sustaining of capabilities assessed by capability targets. And then describe how those capabilities were used in a real-world incident, if that's applicable. And report whether investments were made in support of a project identified in a hazard mitigation plan. This gives you a good idea of the money of the grants that your program receives and how those grants are allocated within your emergency management program. And then you can go back through all of the gaps that you have identified and match it up. Is where your grants being allocated best fitting where your largest gaps are in your emergency management program. So here are just some approaches to completing a THIRA and SPR. It's by no means comprehensive, but here are some key things to mention. Use a whole community approach, just like anything else in planning. This would include your private sector, your VOAD, other government entities, faith-based organizations, residents, schools. Also use tools that FEMA provide. That's mostly what I do, and they have two. One is the whole community input form, and one is the universal reporting tool. The whole community input form is a spreadsheet that walks you through each step of THIRA and SPR. And that's actually what Region 3 is working to do theirs. And I've been lucky enough to attend their regional meetings, and we've been just working through as a group on the whole community input form. The universal reporting tool is, if anybody is ever interested in it, I can help coordinate that. But it's a FEMA software, so I have to be honest, it's slightly clunky, but it's another way that you can capture all of this data. If I could give one piece of advice with THIRA and SPR, it's document the method to your madness. However you arrive at the numbers that you input, journal it and say how you came up with that, whether it was talking to stakeholders or subject matter experts, or using census data. However you came to that number, document it, because you think you'll remember in a year and you might not. I have the memory of a goldfish, and I've already forgotten what I did 2 months ago. So, and also if there's any turnover, that way whoever your successor is has that information. Because when you just stare at raw data, you have no idea where that came from and why you arrived at that number. Also, remember that numbers are your best guess. Nobody knows for sure. A THIRA and SPR, while it does collect quantitative data, it is still a best guess. And really, nobody can prove you wrong. Nobody can go back and say, that number doesn't look right. You and your stakeholders are the only ones that really know what you think those numbers look like. And so provide your best guess and know that is good enough. So that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions? You can use the chat or speak. Oh, Chris.
I just have a question. There's multiple partners that could contribute to this timeline, and I've heard about THIRA through the years, and it has evolved itself, but just seems like such a large animal that you have to eat one bite at a time. But strategies for, I'm a large city, but a small emergency management program. You know, how do we take those small bites to get those partners involved? I don't know. I mean, that's so challenging with everything in emergency management. We have lots of large animals.
That is an excellent question. I'll talk a minute about what we've been doing with Region 3. So Region 3 expressed interest in developing a THIRA and SPR. And so I've been helping them do that. And basically what we did is start out as a group, and I know that I'm talking at a regional level, and we picked one of the threats and hazards that seemed like it could apply to each one of the counties, and then work through all of the steps together. So it was almost a workshop style with the region. If it's something that you don't do regionally, I think the workshop approach with your stakeholders, because you're right, it shouldn't be done just you, because you really need stakeholder involvement, just like anything else in the planning process. But I would suggest doing it in a workshop setting to where you can work on it as a group with the applicable stakeholders. And you may not need every stakeholder for each portion of this, but break it up. One of the advantage that everyone here who is at the local level has is that there is currently no mandate for you to complete one, whereas the state, for our grant, it's a grant requirement. So we have to complete one every year by December 31st. So we're on a bit of a time crunch, and we don't always have the opportunity to take it bite by bite. But whereas it's right now not a mandatory thing, you can really work through each step thoroughly with your stakeholders and take a little bit more time. And if you need help with any of that, DEM is here to support you, whether it's something that you want to turn into a workshop. I think that training and exercise probably has some guidance on how to do that. I can also weigh in too with how I've been doing it with Region 3, and we can work through that together so you don't feel like you're left high and dry. THIRA and SPR, I don't know how any of you feel, but when I first learned about it, I was extremely intimidated by it. Thanks, Ken. Ken Crowdy had to jump off, but does that help answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, I like the workshop idea because you're avoiding the silos. So that's a good strategy.
Yeah. We've also done, because we are on a tighter schedule and haven't been able to take our time the last couple of years with THIRA and SPR, we've broken down what information we need from each individual subject matter expert and then sent out forms for them to complete. With you, and probably I imagine how many hats you must have to wear, I don't know if that's something that's feasible for you, but that's also another option, and I would be happy to talk to you more about that. Skylar, I see a hand up.
Yeah, I'll just speak a little bit more to, if I can, that stakeholder work group. And I love the idea on a regional level. An idea, Chris, might be to get with some of your surrounding cities that share some of the same SMEs or stakeholders that are addressed in a core capability, and hold one meeting for all of you and then discuss. That way you're not stressing out your stakeholders, whether it's coming to core capability about power restoration or public works or sheltering. That's one way to look at it and make sure all the right SMEs are in the room and can answer everybody's questions at once. That's something I know I'm looking forward to do at our state level, is bring more SMEs to the table for each of these core capability workshops that we have been holding.
And Tracy also dropped in the chat, another idea would be to take it to one target capability at a time too. And Will Lusk said a couple of possibilities for getting work groups together to do it would be: one, using your EOC staff plus invite the VOADs and business sector, or two, try using the LEPC plus invites to VOADs and citizens. Those are all really great suggestions.
Angela, hey, this is Doug. One of the things I think that I liked what Tracy was saying about the take one core capability is that many of us participate either as a county with each individual jurisdiction in a pre-disaster mitigation plan. And this sure looks like it has a lot of same similarities on how we build that plan or try to structure it in a good approach. It sure be nice to have all of this done at the time of that plan's recirculated after the third or fifth year. So I think that's really good to take that one core capability and work with it with all the suggestions brought about today.
Absolutely. And I love, Doug, that you drew the connection of the overlap between THIRA and SPR and your hazard mitigation plan. That's excellent. Because they're definitely meant to build on one another. Any other questions about the presentation? Okay, so I'm just going to toss out some questions to all of you. One question I have for you guys, especially at the local level, guys and gals, are there any of you that would be interested in doing, I guess this would merit a poll, but we're just going to do it. Either you could raise your little hand on the bottom of the screen or drop it in the chat. Are there any of you that would be interested in completing a THIRA and SPR if you had some support from the DEM planning section? I see Whitney and Chris and Doug and George. Did I miss anybody in the chat?
Got two Chris's.
Two Chris's. Excellent. That's really good to know, because I would be very interested in being able to support all of you and work through it and hopefully eliminate some of the intimidation that I first experienced when encountering THIRA and SPR. I know pre-COVID we were talking about maybe having a breakout session at one of the conferences, and so maybe when life, if ever it resumes to normal, we can revisit that. But also we can work on a more one-on-one basis. Yes, Chris.
I thought I was lowering my hand. Never mind.
I do that all the time. Actually, what I do is I raise it and I never lower it. So I'm like that kid in the classroom that has to hold up the hand with the other hand because I get so tired. Okay, my other question is, maybe we could think about and I could call on a couple of people, what are the top 2 threats and hazards that you could think of right now that keep you up at night in your jurisdiction? George says earthquake. And Doug says flood or earthquake. Chris, dam failure or max release of the reservoir. Another dam failure. Those are really excellent. So congratulations, you just completed THIRA Step 1. Mark, long-term cold weather and power outage. Yeah. This is really good. Is there anybody from Region 3 on the call? They've already heard this presentation, so they may have opted out. No, I don't see anybody. So theirs was using a hazmat spill, kind of mimicking the JUAB train derailment. But yeah, so really, for those of you that answered that question, you already did THIRA Step 1. So congratulations, you can move to THIRA Step 2. If there is anybody for those of you who are interested in continuing with building a THIRA and SPR, please, here's my contact information. Please reach out to me and we can either set up a meeting or I can send over some resources your way. I didn't include links to the resources because some of them weren't linkable, but for your reference, I have used the Comprehensive Preparedness Guide 201, along with some technical assistance webinars offered by FEMA, and just some of what the state has been doing to complete our own. Also, there's the whole community input form, which I would recommend over the universal reporting tool that I can share with all of you and walk through how you could complete one on your own and move on to THIRA Step 2. So that's all I have for everyone today, unless there's any other questions or comments, or if somebody else has completed a THIRA and SPR and have some best practices or pitfalls to avoid that they want to share. Well, hearing none, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to talking to everyone again soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Angela, for your presentation today. As a reminder, this webinar and all other webinars in this series will be available on the DEM website at dem.utah.gov/exercises or now at dem.utah.gov/iwonder. Our webinar next week will be an I Wonder how to train newly elected officials on emergency management. This will be presented by our own Alden Orm. If you have any I Wonder topic suggestions, please reach out to tbodley@utah.gov to have your topic added to our calendar. We're always excited to help you explore and get to know all that DEM can offer the emergency management community. Thanks, everyone.